Hi, I'm James Gardner, host of Your History, Your Story, a podcast for anyone who loves hearing fascinating tales about remarkable people, intriguing topics, and significant historical events. Our hope is to inspire you to uncover and share your history and your story. Welcome to Your History, Your Story. In this episode, we're honored to speak with Dr. Mark Rutland, renowned author, speaker, and founder of the international ministry Global Servants, which he established with his wife Alison. Dr. Rutland joins us to discuss his latest book, Keep On Keepin' On, How to Die Young, as Old as Possible. The book highlights the transformative power of humor, forgiveness, gratitude, and generosity as we navigate the journey of aging. We hope you enjoy this uplifting and insightful conversation. I'd now like to welcome Dr. Mark Rutland to our show. Welcome, Mark.
Hello. So glad to be with you.
Well, I'm very, very happy to be speaking with you because I like a really good laugh, but I also like to read very practical information that I can apply to my own life and life experience. So it is really an honor to talk to you today about your new book, Keep On Keeping On. And before we dive into that fantastic book, I want to ask you a few things about yourself.
Sure.
So I did a little research on you, and you have a very accomplished and continue to have a very accomplished career, which includes many, many years of ministry. You've been serving others for many years. And one of the main things that I wanted to really talk about is your ministry, Global Servants. Can you talk about how that ministry was started? I understand you co-founded it with your wife.
Yes, we started that in 1977. We were wanting to move from pastoring a local church into doing evangelism, and we needed a mechanism for it. So we created Global Servants. At that time, we had no idea what was going to happen with it. We were really just looking for a way to do itinerant evangelism and not starve to death. And to see what's happened with it, we have nearly 70 churches in 5 countries. We have 2 very substantial girls' homes, one in Southeast Asia and one in West Africa. We have a big school in West Africa, about 500 students. And it's just been kind of one of those things that God just touched in his infinite grace, and it did far more. People say, your dreams have come true. I say, no, we left my dreams long ago.
Sometimes when we look at our own dreams from the past, and sometimes we see that God had other plans for us that were way, way, way better than what we were hoping for, right?
That's exactly right. And being the president of 2 universities, pastoring a megachurch, everything, I would say when I look back on my life, the thing that gives me the greatest sense of personal satisfaction is the work we've done with tribal girls to keep them from sex trafficking. I think when I look back at everything, it's maybe not the most glamorous or the biggest or the most, most famous kind of thing we ever did, but when I look back on 57 years of ministry, I think the girls' homes are the thing my wife and I feel the most personal satisfaction in.
You dedicated this book to your wife. Tell us about your wife.
Well, Alison and I were junior high school sweethearts. I was in the 9th grade and she was in the 8th grade when we met. And we just dated for the 5 years till she graduated from high school. We got married. I was 19 and she was 17. I told one of the university chapels one time my wife and I got married at 19 and 17, and they thought I said we got married in 1917. It sent a gasp through the auditorium. But we've been married 57 years. She's the love of my life. She's a wonderful, wonderful lady. She and I have worked together, taught together, spoken together, led together all these years.
And I imagine you both have done quite a bit of traveling around the world together, haven't you?
Yes. Of course, we had 3 children in the process, so she has not traveled as much as I have. I've preached on every inhabited continent of the globe multiple times, many, many countries. I think I need to stop sometime and calculate that, but dozens of countries. And Alison has been with me on some of those, many of those, and around the United States, much. We used to teach a couples conference that we did early on. She kind of has asked to retire from that now, but we did that. Sometimes it would be between 15 and 25 of those a year for 25 years. So we did those. And then the first lady of a university, I was the president of two substantial universities, and she had an office right beside mine. That's actually a very demanding job. And she did it with grace and every step of the way.
Well, that is wonderful. Now, she also had a few words, I think, in this book that inspired you at some point while you were writing it. Is that true?
Yes, she's always been a help to me on the books. This is my 20th book, and she's always been a help to me. On this one, though, it was so personal, and I needed editing before it got to an editor. I wanted somebody to read it. For example, one may think what you write is funny, and nobody else thinks it's funny. So I would read it to her aloud, read aloud to her, and if she laughed, that was a big help to me. And sometimes she would say, "Yes, that is funny, but don't say that." So she was sometimes the voice of reason, encouragement, and there were places where she would say, "All right, that's good, but I think you need to add to this." So she really was part of the writing process of this book.
Well, I'm glad she was, because whatever combination you used, it really worked. And I want to start off by saying why I like the book.
Thank you.
Okay. It is a book that, first of all, the cover is quite humorous. And when we think about aging, sometimes we may not think about humor. We may think of fear. I mean, you talk about it all through the book, certain kinds of fear and maybe resentment about certain things or people.
Yes.
Because we're getting old. And when I was reading it, I was thinking about watching as a kid Dennis the Menace. You remember that show?
Absolutely.
And old Mr. Wilson, this cantankerous old man, and he's yelling all the time. But yet Dennis seemed to be attracted to Mr. Wilson. He always wanted to be with Mr. Wilson
Yes.
all the time. So there's a sort of I guess, a curiosity that young people have about older people. And you talk about that. But it was something it was good medicine for me, because I'm 66 now and I am retired. I mean, I still do some substitute teaching, but I'm starting to think a little bit that, wait a minute. Now, if I do the math, if I live to be 100, I'm still 2/3 of the way. But the book just made me laugh and made me think. So I really want to talk to you about what inspired you to write this book.
Well, I love your reference to Mr. Wilson. I didn't have him in my mind, but we've all known a Mr. Wilson. And I was just determined not to be Mr. Wilson. I didn't want to spend my senior years chasing kids out of my yard, get away from my apple trees. I just didn't want to be that guy. And then I felt I want to help other people not to be that guy or that woman. I just see so many people my age. You're 60, so I'm 11 years older than you are. And so let me say to you, the next 10 years is great. Don't fear anything. Everything's okay. But I just didn't want people to, I wanted to have a word for people that we could do this last stretch with joy and a sense of humor. I wanted somebody to say a word of encouragement and joy and humor. Like you said, a merry heart doeth good like medicine. I wanted to say to people, look, take your medicine like a big boy and laugh in the face of arthritis and all the stuff that goes with this. I'm not making some kind of dismissal of being old. Something hurts all the time that didn't used to hurt, and something doesn't work that used to work, and that's part of the territory. But how can we face it with joy and with a sense of humor that can make old people more winsome and more attractive rather than just brittle and angry.
Definitely. So in your book, you refer to this big old oak tree in the yard, and you call it a comforting delusion. Could you talk about
Yes.
that?
Yes, we have in our backyard a massive oak tree. It's stable. It doesn't look fragile in any way, but were it to fall, the fall zone is what they call where a tree will fall. The fall zone would almost certainly comprehend our house and destroy it and everything in it, including including persons that are in it. But I don't live every day of my life in dread that that tree will fall. I can't live that way. And that's the way it is with the vicissitudes of life. Um, you're driving down the highway and you see a car crash on the side of the road. You don't grip the wheel and live in terror. That's going to happen to me, further down the road. You live in a sense that that was that, but I'm moving on. And so you live in this delusion that the tree will never fall. And as that tree is old age and the things that go with old age, there is that. Some of us are healthier than others, some more energetic than others. Tragedies of age happen later or earlier, depending. But if whether it's old age or even the end of life, that tree is there. It's in the backyard, and there's nothing to do. We just can't live in dread. We can't wake up every morning and walk on the back porch and say, "Oh God, that tree is there." You just can't. You can't live that way. It'll make you crazy. So what we do is we accept the presence of the tree and move on with our life. It is a kind of comforting delusion. We say the tree may fall on everybody else, it'll never fall on me.
Yeah, we have a bunch of oak trees around our property, and before Hurricane Sandy came through here, I never really thought about those trees much, and they're towering. And after the storm, so many in our neighborhood went down. We counted about 40 something trees within a 1 mile radius of our house that went down. But we were fortunate, none of them fell. And yet, just about 6 months ago, a big oak tree right next to us came down in like a pretty light rainstorm and went right across our driveway and smashed our wall and stuff like that. And it was like, wow, this thing actually did go down without much provocation. So it's there. But I think with like now, a lot of people I see are taking down trees. Is it because now all of a sudden we're afraid they're all going to fall on us? Is that what this today's society is getting away from or gravitating more toward?
Yeah, I think I want to tell you what shocked me the most about the COVID thing was the level of fear that gripped what I thought was an otherwise pretty stable culture. And the level of obsessive fear, James. I mean, really, people were terrified. And I realized in that process that a lot of people live with a high level of fear. And I think that that's really another reason I wanted to write this book is to say that one can accept the reality of the tree in the backyard and accept that it's there and there is some level of inevitability attached that it is there. I mean, unless Jesus comes back, we're all going to die.
Mm.
And the aging process, that's just not one of the funnest things I can think of. The aging process, if you're choosing between the aging process and a week at a fair, they don't really compare, but it is there. It's real. But I just don't want to live in fear of that. And I want to help people not live in fear, to be able to accept it with some level of equanimity and balance and rational sense of humor. I don't mean just whistling past a graveyard. I just mean, look, if you slam your hand in the door of your car, you can get all angry. I'm going to get a lawyer. Ford Motor Company's going down. Or you can be angry at yourself, oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. Or you can, more people get mad at God. Well, you've done it to me again. Or you can say to yourself, this is the kind of things that people do, and I'm a people. People
Mm.
slam their hands in doors. It happens. And now it's happened to me. And everybody else is going to laugh. If you can laugh first, it takes the sting out of it.
I definitely agree. We try to enforce humor in our household, and sometimes we laugh at things and we look over at somebody else in the room and they're like, that's not even funny.
Good.
I mean, you fell down the stairs, you could have gotten hurt.
There are some things in life for which the only psychologically balanced, emotionally mature, and spiritually authentic response is a good belly laugh.
Hmm.
There are some things that are funny, and there are some things that are funny about us. And if we can get in on the joke, it takes the sting out of life.
Very good point. And back on your book, I noticed that when you were a younger person, a much younger person, you were an observer of older people. And you had some very important and interesting people in your lives, in your life. Can you talk about some of those people, who they were and how they impacted you?
Yes, let me choose two as a contrast. One was my great grandfather. He was a blacksmith in East Texas. He had walked behind a wagon from Tennessee all the way to East Texas and opened a blacksmith shop. And then subsequently, when smithing went out of being a viable trade, more or less, he opened a small store. Due to a succession of young marriages, my grandparents, my parents, my mother got married when she was 15. Due to that, I knew my great grandparents like a lot of people know their grandparents. And my great grandfather was a huge person in my life. He was a man of character, of deep faith, of graciousness. My great grandmother, his wife, was Irish, and she was a handful, buddy. I mean, if you think of a 5 foot tall, if she stood on her tiptoes, 5 foot tall, redhead Irish woman with the temper intact, that's who he dealt with. and and he just loved her and was gentle and gracious, and he made a huge impact in my life. Contrast him, I did not have any financial help going to college. My parents were not able to do that. And so my wife and I worked our way through. We have 5 degrees between us, and we finished all 5 of them without a dollar of student debt. We never borrowed a dime. But what that means is we worked our rear ends off. So I took every job there was and everything that came up. And at one point, I was working in a factory, and the owner of the factory hired me also to do a part-time chauffeuring in the evening with his mother. And she was it was just the meanest old woman I've ever known in my life. She was just mean. And the contrast between her and my great grandfather was almost like some kind of a biblical experience. Choose which way you want. And I just realized I want to be my great grandfather. I want young people to say, hey, what a cool old guy. I dreaded every moment I drove her around. And she was just mean. She was mean to everybody. And I just said I don't want to be her.
You know, I think about your great grandfather, if he were watching this or listening to this podcast, that how he would feel to think that he made such a big impact on you that 60 something years later, you're talking about him in this positive light, that you have impacted, that he impacted you. And then you in turn have written this book that is impacting other people who may impact younger generations. So what a legacy compared to the other example where this meanness of spirit, it can just be toxic and contaminate those around, and even serve as an example to go in the opposite direction many, many years later. So as an older person now, I do stop and think now that younger people are watching me and listening to me. We're not totally irrelevant. Sometimes we think we're older, younger kids don't even see us. But if we have some sort of influence in some way and show an example of what it is like to have humor and really love life and people, what a great legacy, for the future.
Yeah, well, there is a level of invisibility that happens as you age.
True.
There are people, younger people particularly, just don't see the old guy in the room. Okay, if you can accept that, and there is a there is a kind of liberty that goes with that. When you're younger, you think everybody's looking at you, and it makes you self-absorbed and all the rest. But as you get older, you kind of realize uh, nobody's cares that much whether your hair is messed up or even if you have any. It kind of changes. There's a liberty that goes with it. But if you can lace that invisibility with positiveness. So if you make it invisible and angry and bitter, then your invisibility becomes a curse. But if you can make it lace the invisibility with the positive. I came around the corner of a building when I was a university president, and there was a boy standing there holding a load of books. And I said, just in passing, "Hey, you handsome? How you doing?" And he dropped them. He dropped them. I said, "Well, did I scare you, son?" And he said, "Well, President Rutland, kind of you did." He said, "I'm 22 years old and nobody has ever told me I'm handsome." Well, he may not remember a single lecture in an English literature course his entire 4 years at that university. But right now, somewhere, he's telling somebody, "President Mark Rutland told me I was good looking."
Oh, I love that. That is terrific. You talk about different things in your book pertaining to the aging process, and one of them is letting go. And you refer to memories and how memories are wonderful in many ways. As a matter of fact, we're about telling stories, your history, your story. So we tap into people's memories and what they recall. I cherish stories from my parents and my grandparents, like you do. But at some point, we start comparing the old days, right, to now, and it could set us off on a bitter track.
Yes, I mean, there are some things that I cherish, lying on a pallet on the front porch of my great grandparents' little shack in East Texas on a summer night that was so hot you couldn't stand to sleep inside. I slept on a pallet. My great grandmother, who was very musical, sitting in a little straight back chair and playing the guitar and singing Irish folk songs. That's wonderful. I remember that. On the other hand, there is no way to put a golden glow on an East Texas outhouse in the middle of the night. There's no way to make that. So people say the old ways, the good old days, some of it, yes, some, well, I cherish some things. Look, I like air conditioning and indoor plumbing. I'm good with it. So I think that if you can get a sense of humor and a sense of balance about life. And one of the things that makes us so fearful in old age is how technology, words, vocabulary, everything is changing so fast that it makes us feel we're constantly in a country we don't recognize, in a world we don't recognize. And if you can kind of let go and let it happen a little bit, kind of go into the stream of things. I'm not talking about morally or theological. I'm not talking about compromise. I'm just talking about not getting all mad because words don't mean the same thing. I preached at the graduation of a university in Texas a couple of years ago. As I was coming out, one of the graduates carrying his gown over his arm, he saw me coming across the parking lot, and he said, "Dr. Rutland, that was really dope." Okay, I just said, "Thank you." But That word has gone through 5 or 6 iterations in my lifetime. And if you can kind of relax and enjoy it, be okay with that, then it makes life so much more, it makes you more supple,
Agreed.
and you can accept things in life more.
Yeah, and I think you even talk about how we have to remain teachable. We have to be even if we think we know it all, we don't, and that we can be open to listening to younger people explain things. Now, Kelly and I started this podcast 4 years ago.
All
We
right.
we got this equipment delivered to us. We looked at it. It was like the cockpit of a 747. I barely knew what a podcast was. We had to listen to a lot of millennials, maybe a few Gen Zs, on how to do all this stuff, and we're very grateful for that.
Exactly. My staff convinced me that I should do a podcast. Now, I did not tell them. I just said, let me think about it. Let me think about it. I went in my office and Googled up podcast because I didn't have to admit to them I didn't know what the heck a podcast was. I thought a podcast was when some kind of a seed plant dropped its in the fall, and cast its pods on the ground. But I went back and said, well, I've thought about it. I think a podcast would be good. Set everything up. I did just what you did, and now I have a podcast, and it's great. I enjoy it. We do it, and it's great. But remember, podcast didn't even exist when I was in my 40s. That's 37 years ago. There was no such thing as a podcast. So it's not just that I'm learning something new. We're in an entirely new terrain. There are things that social media. When I was young, social media meant talking at a drive-in movie. You know.
I like that one. That's a good one.
So
Wow.
you just have to kind of accept the changes in life and keep learning, keep trying new stuff. Don't get all angry and clutch at things. Let life happen. Memories. You were talking about memories a minute ago. One of the saddest losses of age, maybe the saddest as we age, and that can happen, is the loss of memories. That's a terrible deprivation. As afflictions come later on, then lose. So therefore, while you can, cherish your memories, tell them, share them. Before my mother lived to be 99, and she was pretty together through almost all of it. A few months before she died, my wife and I sat down with her, and we had certainly heard her memories, but we had never done it methodically. We just sat down and said, talk, just talk to us. And she told us her memories, her childhood. Think 100 years earlier, and her memories, and it became a very precious part of our lives, are my mother's childhood memories. I learned that early on. My great grandfather used to talk about the green hills of Tennessee. And I was a little boy in burnt over East Texas. And my great grandfather talked about the green hills of Tennessee like they were heaven. And I realized as a child, old people's memories are important because they're reaching back through a veil you can't access. And you need to cherish those memories. Well, then translate that into your own life. You're James, what'd you say, 66?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's somebody who's 20 in your life. I don't know who that is. You have some 20-year-old in your life. Your memories sound to them like the Crimean War.
Yeah.
To them it sounds like, right when the Revolutionary War ended and the British left and I was young. That's what it sounds like to them. So I don't want to inflict my memories on them as, I was better when I was a kid. But that's a wealth that they need to learn to tap into, and we need to be able to share. Memories are important.
Spot on. Thank you for that. That's something we're hoping to promote in this podcast is, even
Yeah, I like the title of your podcast. Your history, your story. Really, that's a major part of my book.
it is, and I loved it. I loved it. Now, one of the things that it certainly affects all of us, but it can be particularly bad as a senior, and that is a lack of forgiveness.
Mm.
If I may mention a story about a man that you knew whose father was a Civil War veteran, and there was that lack of forgiveness that was going on there. Could you talk about that briefly?
Yes. First of all, let me say about that story. One of the things that people miss in the story, is to think that when I was in my early 20s, I met a man in his late 80s whose father had fought in the Civil War. Now, how history can come together because his father had fought in the Civil War, married late, so he had a child when he was in his 50s, and that child in his 80s talked to me in my 20s. So I sat there listening to him and realizing that his father, not his great grandfather, his father had fought in the Civil War. So what had happened was this guy, Grover Cleveland was his real name, but he went by GC. So GC had been a young boy in Ohio, I think, maybe Michigan, I can't remember where, as a child and young person. And there was an advert for a railroad position in Georgia. Georgia was rebuilding from the Civil War, and railroads were critical to that, and they were hiring people. So he wanted to go take that job. His father had been in the Union Army, had been captured and imprisoned at the horrifying Andersonville prison camp, which was a nightmare. There's no doubt about that. And he had lost a leg, an amputation as a result of infection. And he told his son, if you take that job in Georgia, I'll never speak to you again. So it was a crisis for that young man, but he wanted out of I think his father had worked in a steel mill or something like that. He wanted out of that. And so he took the job. And now I knew him. I was his pastor, and I was 22 and he was 88 or something like that. And I said, GC, did he ever come around? And he said, no, we never spoke to each other ever again. And he said, I don't think he ever said my name again. And then he said something I'll never forget. He said, look, Pastor, wars end if we'll let them. And it's stuck in my mind. And it can be a family squabble. It can be unforgiveness. If we'll let wars end, we can move on into forgiveness and find grace in our old age. We don't have to live as amputated veterans of some war that nobody even thinks about anymore.
That was a very touching example there. And that bitterness taken to the grave makes you think. It really does. Now, another thing that really stood out to me, so many things stood out to me, but you talk about giving. Giving during your life, you may be a big giver, and sometimes you may decide when you get older that I don't know if the Social Security is enough. I don't know if I've got enough to last me. I don't have enough to leave to my kids. Can you talk to that issue a little bit that we face as we're getting older?
Yeah, the issue there is a balance, isn't it? Because on the one hand, as we age and whatever retirement means, our streams of revenue may decrease or shrink or whatever like that. So what can happen is that a fear mechanism sets in and we clutch at the small that we have. So I'm not saying that you can give at the level you used to when you were making, a huge salary. You may not be able to give at the quantitative level that you used to, but you can give with the same spirit of generosity. Remember, Jesus praised the old woman who gave 2 pennies. She gave out of her old age, her widowhood, and her poverty. And it's the spirit of giving. it goes beyond money. I do believe that we should not quit giving to your church, giving to missions, giving to whatever. Keep giving and keep giving joyfully. But I'm talking about a generosity of life, generous with your praise, generous with, I'll give you an example, generous with listening. Old people who will listen to young people are much loved. They're much loved. The older we get, we want to inflict our memories on everybody else. And if they ask, you should be ready to tell them. But when they talk, look, you're gonna encounter young people that don't know anything, and they have some crazy idea that Taylor Swift is as good as Elvis Presley. I mean, that's crazy stuff, right? But we have to listen to them and pretend that their brains are in order. And if we'll listen and pay attention and stare into their empty little faces like they're making sense, that's generous. That's a generous way to live life, to listen to other people, to tip generously in restaurants, to be generous with compliments, to be generous in life. I believe is one of the most winsome of all human characteristics. And as you get old, it's harder and harder to be winsome.
For sure.
So why not be winsome in the one thing you got, which is generosity?
The other thing you talked about in the book was the effect that gratitude, a grateful spirit, can have on a person of any age, but really as a senior, older person. The difference between somebody who lives with a spirit of gratitude versus a person who does not, and how that could affect our lives and the lives of those around us.
Yes. And again, at any age, gratitude is such a godly and such a winning. People want to be around grateful people. But as one ages, gratitude becomes so much more noticeable. There may come a moment where some caregiver is having to take care of you, and that may not be the dream of their lives. And if you lash out at them and get angry and all that, then you're not taking into account the deep gratitude. I'm grateful. I'm grateful to a waitress who brings me what I actually ordered. I don't take that for granted anymore. when I say I want my steak medium well and it actually arrives medium well, I feel like I want to say thank you. And I want to be grateful in life, grateful to God, grateful to live where I live, to be as healthy as I am. Instead of whining because my fingers hurt, I want to be grateful because I can still walk. And that is one of the most charming attributes of aged people is gratitude.
And it's energizing.
Yes.
It's energizing.
I agree. That's a good point. The more grateful you are, it seems odd. The more grateful you are, the easier it gets to be grateful.
True.
And to be thankful. I minister who made a big impact on my life when I was young, and he told me one time that he wrote 50 thank you notes every morning. I said, I can't think of 50 people I'm grateful for. And he said, then you're not thinking enough. He said, every now and again, write a thank you note to the mayor. Hey, you're doing a great job. Tape one to the garbage can and say, you're the best garbage collector I've ever known. And I never have, I want to be honest, I know I used to lie on a podcast, but I've never arrived at the 50 notes a day. I've never reached that. That was his vision and his goal, and he did it. But it has made me more. I tend more and more to send a text, a thank you note, an email. Hey, you did a great job. That was wonderful. We attended the Christmas program. Our son is a pastor. We went to the Christmas program at his church. And I sent a text message to the music director. That's the best Christmas program I've ever been to. You know, I'm not trying to calibrate whether that statement is actually true or not.
Oh,
I'm just
that.
saying, I'm just saying that's a perfectly decent thing to say. And he texted me back and he said, "Wow, thank you, Dr. Olin. I really appreciate that." I texted my son, "You're doing a great job, you know." And it makes it's harder and harder to be charming the older you get, and gratitude is charming.
It really is. And I'm hoping that people buy your book because Keep On Keeping On. It's, I mean, there are so many illustrations. You give stories. You are a fantastic storyteller, by the way.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
the laughs. I don't know if Kelly heard me. I was in our little tea. We have a tea room we made, and I sit in there and I was reading the book, and I just kept laughing. I said, "You got to come in here. I got to read this to you."
Good.
But it's also real. It doesn't sugarcoat. It doesn't deny the oak tree at all. It actually embraces the oak tree, and because it embraces the oak tree, it is real, and it also puts you in a place where you can find that you can unlock an amount of energy and influence that is so valuable that you're like your great grandfather. You're talking about him today. I'm hoping that my great grandkids are talking about me in a way that they said, "Oh, wasn't he funny? Didn't we like to be around him?" or something like that. Instead of we were afraid to go into the room with him if he was watching the show, or he would be nasty and cantankerous or whatever like that. You don't want that, and that is well, for two reasons: the way you affect other people, and probably just as important, how it affects you yourself in your later years.
You never know what some young person is observing about you, what they will later remember, either for good or ill. You don't know the eccentricities of your life that you're not even particularly conscious of, and that they latch on to, see, observe, record in their minds. And you have any grandchildren?
I have 5 grandchildren.
Okay, the youngest of your grandchild, I want you to think when he or she is 66.
Mm-hmm.
What what are they going to say about my grandpa? My grandpa did this. What's that thing that they're going to remember? And so I want to be more and more intentional about planting those things. If they're going to remember stuff and they're going to tell stuff, so why not buy some purchase in that narrative? I'd rather they remember and tell somebody later on what I want them to remember.
This book, it did make me think a lot because as far as looking for examples of aging, I had in both of my parents, I had kind of different experiences. One, my dad died when he was 69. He hadn't been retired that long. In my opinion, he didn't really become a senior citizen. Didn't get the opportunity. He had bladder cancer. I was very close to my dad. It was very difficult. I was 29 when he passed. I didn't see him as I consider an older person. He's basically the age I am now. And my mother was robbed of her memory with Alzheimer's when she was in her 70s. So we didn't, for the last 10 years of her life, she just wasn't herself. But I do have my grandparents. I had 3 grandparents. Really, I had them for a long time. My grandfather died when I was 31. And he was a storyteller. Didn't have much money, but he was generous. He used to take the whole family out to dinner, and he had 2 outfits. We called it his home and away jerseys. He had a red blazer with a beige tie and a beige blazer with a red tie, and the tie had tennis rackets on it. And
I love this guy. Now, I wish I'd known him. See, that's great.
He was born in Ireland, but he lived in most of his life in England. He was in World War I and World War II. He was a veteran of both wars, and he told great stories, some of which may have been embellished a little bit.
Of course. That is your right.
Yes, but I was blessed with his example in older age like that, so that was great. But But again, your book has so many stories in it that are very they're not only humorous, but they really tell great truths. And I want to thank you for writing this book. If you had to say the one big takeaway you want for somebody getting this book to get from reading it, what would that be?
I began the book with a quote from Dylan Thomas: "Do not go gentle into that good night, but rage, rage against the dying of the light." I think the problem with that passage is that we take the word rage to mean anger. We can become angry old people. We rage against the grocery store. We rage against the internet. We rage against the news. And I think what it means, really, what I choose to make it mean, is to live in a rebellion against the things that make us angry old people. And to come into our aged years with a laughing, joyful, dancing atmosphere. And I use an example from Zorba the Greek. It's a great book where everything at the end just collapses. The mind falls in. It's a complete disaster. And Zorba and his English friend are there, and Basil, the Englishman, turns to Zorba and says, "Teach me to dance." And that's what I want to leave the readers with. When you look at all the dreams that didn't go the way you thought, the stuff that went wrong that fell in, if you just look around at all that and get angry and mean-spirited, then nobody's going to want to be around you, and that's how they're going to remember you. But if you can say, "Hey, let's dance," then that's a kind of rebellion, and it's a joyful rebellion.
Perfect. Fantastic. Mark, how can people find out more about how to order your book, Keep On Keeping On? And also, how can they find more about Global Servant?
Thank you. And by the way, the subtitle of that book is one I've always liked. It is "Keep On Keeping On: How to Die Young as Old as Possible." And if they see that on the subtitle, it is the subtitle of the book, and I've always liked it. So they can find out, they can get the book anywhere they buy top quality, excellent books.
Of course.
So you can get them from Amazon, and if you can find an actual real living bookstore, you can get one there, whatever. Or you can go to drmarkrutland.com. You can get it there. You can get it at Global Servants, our store there. This may not matter to your listeners, James, but it matters to me to say it. Of the hundreds of thousands of books that we've sold worldwide in 20 books, I have never taken a dime. I don't take a penny of it. It all goes to support our girls' homes, so they can get them there. Go to drmarkrutland.com. They can go to Global Servants, and I hope they'll learn more about House of Grace and all the things that we do there. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that.
Oh, you bet. And I think that your ministry is fantastic. And retirement's not in the Bible, right? And we just can keep it going or keep on keeping on like you're doing. And fantastic. I'll tell you, you're my role model for 11 years from now. I'll tell you.
Good. Come on. Come on. The water's fine.
The water's fine. That is terrific. So, as far as, I want to say one more thing about your great-grandfather. You called him Pappy? Was that how you nicknamed him?
Yeah, Pappy.
If you could sit down with him now on his front porch and have a cup of coffee with him, what kind of things that, based on your experience now, what would you ask him, or what would you want to tell him that you didn't think about asking him when you were a little kid?
Yeah, it never occurred to me to ask him when I was a kid. What was his work like, his labor as a blacksmith in early 1900, circa 1900, East Texas? We'd go out to his blacksmith shop. In his 80s, my great-grandfather could pick up an anvil with his forearms, put his forearms under an anvil and pick it up. Okay, I enjoyed that, and he would say, "This, we did this." What I never really got was what was it like in some little town in East Texas. Somebody brought their horse or their mule. Who were those people? I would ask him more about the people that lived in dusty little East Texas towns in 1901.
I think that's great. Isn't that, if only we knew back then, and, and you think of people who worked like that as a blacksmith, he didn't need a gym membership, did he?
No, he didn't. No, he certainly didn't.
No CrossFit for Pappy, right?
He wouldn't have even known what you were talking about.
So thank you again. We're going to post the links to your websites that you mentioned, and I highly recommend Mark Rutland's Keep On Keeping On, How to Die Young as Old as Possible. Great book. And Mark, thank you again for being on our show.
Thank you.
Okay, God bless.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your History, Your Story. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, X, and Instagram to stay connected. We'd love to hear from you, whether you have questions, comments, or a story to share. Until next time, be well and God bless.